Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by a very special guest. After spending some time as the head coach across multiple youth group stages for the Canadian women's national team setup, she served as Phil Neville's assistant head coach with the Lionesses in the 2019 Women's World Cup. Heading back to where she started the majority of her career, she was appointed as the Canadian women's national team head coach and took the Canadian women's national team to their first ever gold medal at the Tokyo Olympics. The last 4 years have included historic wins, major accomplishments, lots of highs, as well as various lows. She is currently in quest with the Canadian national team to defend their title as the reigning Olympic champions in Paris. It is none other than Bev Priestman. Bev, it is a pleasure to have you on here joining me today. How is sunny Spain treating you?
It's very warm for my British skin. But yeah, it's actually we're in a beautiful spot. It's a balance of, we've got the pitch close by, we've got the beautiful sea. So it's a balance of getting the group ready and being nice and fresh. So it's awesome.
Based off that answer, I'm going to pick up the fact that you do love enjoying being around the sea and the water. So it's only
Yeah.
fair to get your take on, is the West Coast the best coast because you are located and based in Vancouver when you are in Canada?
1,000,000% West Coast is the best coast. Absolutely love Vancouver. And to be fair, I have visited some unbelievable places in Canada, but Vancouver tops it.
Well, very, very far from Vancouver. You grew up in CANWNT, a very small place in the Durham County in England. What was your introduction like into football and growing up in a very small town?
Yeah, my introduction to football was literally everybody in the northeast of England lives, sleeps, eats football. Like it's in your blood. You talk about like physical education in school and things. It was pretty much football was the sport, and maybe netball for the girls, but I was allowed to go and play with the boys in football. So at a very young age, I was just kicking a football around in the street. I think I grew up probably more so in an era where it was a little bit more, you literally go knock on your friend's door and you put some jumpers down and you play football. And often I was the only girl amongst that sort of group of people. But yeah, 3, 4 years old, and then every day at school in the yard and things. So just 24/7 surrounded by it, and absolutely loved it.
So how did the introduction of going to school for football science and coaching come into play? Like, did you want to go professional? Was that something that didn't materialize and you were like, coaching is what I want to do? How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, I played club, I played county level, which would be a bit like provincial if I try and link that to Canada. And then obviously the professional pathway, what it is now in England, was not what it was then. And I realized I wasn't going to play for England. I had no left foot, and I still don't. But yeah, and so I got into coaching at a very young age, did my badges very young, supported John Herdman, actually ran a Brazilian soccer school over the road from where I lived, and I went there as a player, but then every night I would help put cones down, and just had a real love for, always wanted to be a teacher, and then you go and put that with football, and it kind of makes sense to be a coach. And I went to college before I went to university, and I was always an average student, like very average. Wasn't terrible, wasn't, unless it was PE, I was pretty average. And then as soon as I specialized in like coaching at college, I became like the student of the year and just really excelled. And then I essentially went to John Moores University, which is at the time was the only place you could do a football degree. And actually my assistant now, he also went there. So yeah, all of the top clubs around England, a lot of their sports scientists, coaches and things would come out of that university. And at that time I worked with Everton while I was there. So it was a great sort of direction. If I wasn't going to be a coach, I'm not sure what I would have been able to do doing that degree.
Do you miss playing at all, or you don't get that itch anymore?
Not anymore. I would love like go and play five-a-side, like pick me up, but the thought of playing 11v11 and giving up a whole Sunday in such a busy world doesn't feel very achievable, and probably sounds like it's going to have lots of injuries written all over it. So I run in a straight line now, and that's as much as I do.
A lot less injuries running in a straight line for
Yes.
sure.
Well, you
Um,
would think that, but yes.
you could trip on the way there too. You're right. You spent some time in New Zealand before kind of doing the whole switch to Canada and kind of making it your home. You started with the youth groups, and you've mentioned why that to you was a little bit different to what you saw in England, and specifically of, I guess, the routes and the setups. What about that prospect looked like it was a great move for you to develop as a coach, but also to be able to invest in those youth groups? And funny enough, a lot of the girls that you worked with are included in the senior setup now.
So for me, to be honest, just being on the grass and being immersed in that set, and I think a lot of my career at that point had been working with and developing youth players and understanding like talent development. So my role in New Zealand before I came to Canada, I was in charge of like the whole talent development system, running national centres and things, and I've done a lot of research in that space. But to come to Canada, yeah, I absolutely loved it. You know, you were on the pitch regularly because I was involved in the under-17s, but then under-15s, under-20s, and you know what I do know about Canada, we produce some unbelievable young players, and I think that's what's so exciting for me now as a national team coach. Once we get this pro league and have the right systems, but when I first
Mm,
moved to Canada, it was very evident to me that the standard of a player coming out 13, 14, 15, 16, like the ceiling of those players could be massive. And I knew that if we can get them accelerated and, you know, into senior team and getting these experience, your Jessies, Jordans, you know, there's a whole group that played for the senior team very young,
mm,
that we could do something special. But I really like to see someone reach their potential. And I think when you're a youth coach, I knew my job was not measured on winning the youth tournament, it was measured on, you know, finding the next Christine Sinclair, or, you know, at the time it was Suri Yeka, you know, she moved in, Jessie Fleming, all those sorts of players, is finding those and helping the senior team be successful for the long term, which you've seen start to happen over a decade now. We've been right up there in the Olympic Games, so absolutely love that part of my job.
You kind of switched it up and I guess changed scenery a little bit with going back home and specifically working with Phil Neville as his assistant coach. And I think you've mentioned a few times that that experience was huge for your growth.
Yeah.
What was it about that time and being in that environment and that setup that pushed a lot of your development and kind of set you up of being a head coach of a senior national team?
Yeah, well, at the time I knew, because I was like running into camps. John had just moved across to the men's side. I was assistant with the women and I was doing all these youth team camps. There became a point where like I was probably a bit burnt out, you know, I was constantly on the go. And then also I knew if I was going to be, which I wanted to be, a world-class senior coach, I had to throw everything into that. And I couldn't, because I was running into a senior team camp because of all of my youth work. And so
Mm.
when the opportunity came up to be just one job and be a world-class assistant coach with, you know, some very good players in England, it was a great time. We just had my little boy, and so, you know, I say it was a good time. Probably my wife doesn't think it was a good time, but it felt like a right break to go make that move. And I think what I learned about myself in that setting is, well, firstly, John and Phil, two very different leaders and do things differently, and probably I'm a blend of both of them, and both have a real impact on my career. I think the second thing is I was well out of my comfort zone in a good way. You know, I was working with, at the time, Lucy Bronze would have been right up there in terms of one of the best players in the world, and just a whole different culture and way of doing things. I think Phil had come through a club structure of, you know, Manchester United, Sir Alex Ferguson, and his approach to even international coaching had that sort of player first feel and club structure feel. And his sessions were very different. And so it was like a totally different experience. I'd worked for John for 10 years of my whole career full time. And now I
Mm.
just got to see a whole different way of doing things. And I think in that period, I developed. Phil was a very trusting head coach. I delivered a lot of meetings and got right in there, and very quickly, you know, thought, okay, well, I miss being a head coach, right? I was a youth head coach a lot of my career. And it just felt that natural point post World Cup. We did well in 2019. COVID hit, and the Olympics went, which we were supposed to have a home Euros and Olympics as part of like a 3 senior team tournament. And, you know, the time felt right I had a lot of offers actually around that time post World Cup of senior head coaching positions. But I think when Canada came calling, it was like, okay, yeah, I want to work with the players that I've helped develop at a young age, and it did feel like home. I spent 5 years there, and I knew what this team could be.
You were appointed shortly before the Tokyo Olympics, and you said that iconic quote of you wanted to change the color of the medal, obviously referring to it from bronze to gold, and you did that. I think a lot of questions of like where did that belief come from? Because it's not like you had taken them to a major tournament, to the World Cup in Denwell, and said, "Yeah, we can do another piece of that." What do you attribute that trust in knowing that this team had that much potential to go out and actually do it?
I think historically I'd been part of, 2015, 2016 Olympics with this group in Rio. And I've seen them when they're at the best. And, in many ways, that was a way of how can I inspire this group? You talk about COVID and this group had almost shut down for a year. And in England, some of them groups are still operating. So
Mm,
if I wasn't careful, there would have been this sort of like porous attitude of, like we've not been active and really underperforming what this team's potential were. And so in many ways for me, it was about setting the bar really high. And if I only had a short runway to the Olympics, I knew I needed to inspire them with such a high sort of benchmark. Christine Sinclair at the time, I'm like, how do I get the next level out of her? And then I think the second thing is I knew I had such a short amount of time. So I just really simplified and changed, to be honest with you. I felt the group needed a whole different approach. And I just changed and simplified the way we were going to tackle that Olympics. And I think those two things coupled together, high motivation, bar set high and clear vision, and then a really clear way that I felt we were going to play that was quite different. And those things, I just had that belief, and particularly when I got my hands on the group and I got to live and feel, I think the April window, we went to She Believes, then we had
mm.
the April window. You can see that the potential was there. And every time I stood on the sideline, I knew the group would run through a brick wall. And I knew that on your day in international football, it comes down to sometimes luck, which we had. We had a bit of luck. We also had hard work that was a real pillar stone of what we did. But on our day, I felt we could compete with the world's best, which we did.
The world's best. I mean, that was the whole knockout route of Brazil, the US, and Sweden.
Yes.
That is a brick wall that you're going after one after the other. At any point, did you lose belief, or perhaps there was a game from one of these knockout matches that not necessarily made you doubt, but it's not a game you want to go back and, I guess, relive from the sidelines again?
I think we had a okay group stage. If I'm honest, I think we started the games well, but I think because I hadn't had them very long, we didn't get a lot of time off the pitch to work on how do we chase a game, how do we close a game, and some of that was still being worked through in that group stage, and we definitely didn't have a perfect group stage. Then we went into the Brazil game, and for anyone who watched it, it was the worst. It was the most boring game. There wasn't a lot creative. We looked tired, and it felt like we were sort of moments from going home, right? Penalty shootout, and I remember being on the sidelines thinking, oh dear, like this could be it. But that moment, the minute we won that game, I knew, like deep down, I knew we could beat the US. And I've said this openly, when I was on that bus on the way to the US game, I knew we were going to win, never in doubt. And then when we beat the US, I knew we could go all the way. I knew it would take a lot of energy management because it felt like a final in itself, because them veterans had waited 20 years to do it. And it did feel a little bit like that. So I knew I needed to get the energy back in the group with an extra day off going into that gold medal match. But for me, the turning point more so was the Brazil game. And I think the group stage, I never lost doubt, and I knew we could do it. But I think we just had an imperfect group stage, which I think if you look historically, not always teams who go and win a tournament have a unbelievable run. They played, I'll use my own country right now, England. We're not playing in the Euros, we're not playing our best football, but they're learning how to win, and they are winning. And that sometimes is tournament football.
Yeah, tournament football is always really interesting. And you highlighting that Brazil game, it was a very nervy game, specifically at the back of those group stages. And there's a lot of highs and lows of competition football. The Olympics brought a lot of highs. I think it was a pivot changing moment to the country. But then you fast forward a little bit, again, obstacles on the journey. There was the World Cup, which perhaps was quite disappointing for you and everybody in the program. I'm really curious to know how how you pick yourself up personally as a coach from such a disappointing tournament, but also understand that you have to do the same with your staff and the players around you.
Yeah. I think I went back to my roots, which is, I'm from a working class background. I've always worked my socks off. And in that 5 weeks, I absolutely worked my socks off. And I went back to Tokyo, sort of mantra in my mind, I want to be a brave coach. And I think the easy thing to do to go into that Olympic qualification was to, oh, well, we've only got 5 weeks, so we can't change a lot. I knew that the World Cup didn't work for many reasons, right? Some of them out of mine and the players' control. There was a lot of distraction, and the year had been an absolute slog in that way. But I knew I need to change something. And so when you're in one of the lowest points of your career, you can do one or two things. You can come out swinging, or you can do what you've always done. And in my mind, if I'd have done that, I'm not sure we would have got over the line in the Olympics, because you were riding this sort of really low wave. And so, yeah, I went back, I just worked my socks off. I remember being at the beach with my little boy on a weekend, and I'm drawing out tactics, and I know where I was in that moment, where I'm like trying to figure out how do I get the best out of the group in front of me, and the brave calls I had to make on selections and changing lineups and shape, and just worked hard. And I think that you have a choice, right? When you hit a low and a rock bottom, it felt like in my case, and I wasn't going to roll over. And I just worked hard and went back to my roots of being brave and making some big calls. Very little sessions to actually accomplish that, but I knew I needed to do something different and break the circuit a little bit, and it certainly did that.
You also certainly came out swinging with the Olympic qualifiers, and I think the majority of the games following that. But it's also really interesting you talk about selection and making brave decisions. When you look at the roster and the players, it's a lot of big personalities, different personalities. How have you been able to manage, or I don't know if you've been able to figure that question of like maintaining or I guess managing these big personalities when there's highs and lows and preparation phases between them all as well.
Yeah, I think when you have a low, I made sure I called every player after the World Cup and gave them a chance to, you hear if people send out a survey, right? How did it go? And you know what's going to come back. I know how it went, and they know how it went. And so I wasn't going to do that. So I called around all the players. We had an honest, open conversation. And from that, I got some themes. And the themes didn't surprise me, because it was exactly how I felt. But then it was like a hard reset button to then move forward. And I made a commitment, they made a commitment from that point forward, and that's got us to where we are right now. But I think, again, if I go back to Tokyo and where I'm at now, what I do know is I made some very ruthless decisions. And ultimately, when off the pitch wasn't going well and the players, I felt they needed some love, you can get caught in just being too nice and trying to be the one that makes everything feel great. And what you know about high performance is that's not how you win. How you win is making it hard every day, people fighting for spots. Like, some of that uncomfortable feeling is what gets the best out of human beings. It got the best out of me, right? Lowest point in my career. If all was plain sailing, I probably wouldn't have approached it the same way. So I think just that being ruthless, I have to be ruthless. I have to pick the right team, make big calls, and yes, I lose sleep over it. It's not my favorite part of the job, but ultimately that's what you have to do to get success. And people have to feel uncomfortable to get that extra 5-10% out of themselves. And history would show me that when players have had to do that and they've had setbacks, they've found another level.
Being ruthless, hard work, running through a brick wall. Are those some of the themes that the team needs to have in order to be able to podium and make it on that big step and have a medal around them in Paris this summer?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what the group need to do. They're a hard-working team. I think that has to be present. And I think if you look at the moments in that World Cup, we just didn't look like us as a coach. I remember standing on the sideline just feeling it's not our identity. And that's because of a lot of reasons. But I think the hard work, the bravery, I think we want to get after teams. We want to bring what we have to offer into a game. And I want to play the way that we can and play better than the opposition are going to play them. And I think that belief, that hunger, that hard work, if all those things are present on our day, and football's cruel, right? It's a bad referee decision, it's an offside call, whatever it might be. You can win or you can lose, but I don't mind losing if we've really shown ourselves in the best way possible. And we did that in Tokyo and we won. We didn't do that in the World Cup. We can lose doing that, but I don't mind. That's football. But as long as we bring our identity and take it right to the wire with teams and show our true potential, then I'll be happy.
Unfortunately, we're kind of running out with time here, so I kind of wanted to end on a fun question of what is the best thing about being a coach in women's football?
You know, we get to go some unbelievable places in the world. I think, you know, I always say to my tech staff, like, it could be worse. We could be in an office 9 to 5 and we just get to experience the world. I think that's one part. And I think we get to work with some unbelievable human beings and like unbelievable high performers. You get to watch the little things that, in business, certain leaders and things do things a certain way, and that's what keeps them at the top. You get to witness that every day in some of these players that have like they're world-class players, where you get to watch and work with them in the little habits of those little 1-2%. For me, that is like, we're incredibly lucky to work with such great human beings, but also unbelievable players, and just watch that naturally evolve. And even just like the young kids that are coming in right now, your Jades, your Simmies, like those players are, I'm just amazed at where they can get to. They're only just starting, and we're part of that journey, and that is really exciting.
They're only just starting, and I have a feeling they'll be here for a moment. Bev, I really appreciate your generosity and time to speak to me today. Best of luck this summer. I know a lot of folks here will be rooting for you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.